Summer 1982, Kent County, Washington. The Green River moved slow that morning, thick with silt and algae. A patrol officer stepped down the muddy bank after a truck driver had reported something floating near the bridge at South 277th Street. What he saw first was the color, pale white against the green. It was the body of a young woman, face turned toward the current, a nylon rope still tight around her neck. Hours later, 2 more were found farther downstream, tangled in weeds. Within weeks, the number grew to 5. The press named him before the police could, the Green River Killer. The victims were women from Seattle's streets, runaways, sex workers, drifters who vanished without notice. The detectives who gathered that summer at the Kent precinct realized the pattern almost instantly. Strangulation, body dumped in water, no sign of sexual assault, but clear ritual. Shoelaces, cords, sometimes even torn clothing used as ligatures. The investigation became the largest in state history. Over 150 officers joined. The FBI set up a field unit on the riverbank. Their first suspect list held nearly 2,000 names. Every week, new remains surfaced. Bones caught in branches, ribs buried in the mud. The current carried more than water now. Among the crowd of volunteers who appeared to help, a quiet man in coveralls often watched from a distance. He worked at a truck plant nearby, drove a faded pickup, kept his head down. His name was Gary Ridgeway. He even offered tips to police, saying he'd seen suspicious people near the bridge. They thanked him politely and moved on. He returned to the river many nights after work. Neighbors later remembered how he cleaned his truck at 2 a.m., water running red into the gutter. At the time, no one asked why. By the end of 1983, the Green River had yielded 13 victims. The task force filled walls with photos, maps, strings connecting names and highways. FBI profilers wrote, "Offender likely male, intelligent, outwardly normal, experiences compulsive need to control, possibly married." The description matched half of Kent County and Gary Ridgeway perfectly. Still, he blended in. Church volunteer, husband, father, a man who mowed his lawn twice a week. When questioned briefly in 1984, he passed a polygraph. The detectives marked him as low priority and moved on. The Green River kept its silence, and beneath that silence, Ridgway kept hunting. Gary Ridgway was born on February 18, 1949, in Salt Lake City, Utah, the middle child in a home ruled by silence and fear. His father, Thomas Ridgway, a bus driver, spoke little, but filled the house with warnings about prostitutes and sinful women. His mother, Mary, worked in a department store, strict and immaculate, obsessed with cleanliness. Gary later said she would scrub his genitals after bedwetting until the skin burned, scolding him for the smell. He remembered her perfume mixed with bleach, a memory that never left him. At school, he was quiet and slow to learn. He struggled with reading and spelling, often scoring below average on IQ tests. Classmates mocked him. Teachers described him as blank-faced, oddly calm. At 16, he stabbed a 6-year-old boy near a woods path, watching the blood flow to see how it looked. The boy survived, but the act went unreported. Later, Ridgway would call it a test. Home life taught him rules and shame. Mary's anger could turn sudden. A slap for tracking mud, a scream for a misplaced tool. She would tell her sons that women were dirty and that desire was weakness. Gary listened, absorbing each word as instruction. He began to dream of control, of cleaning what he saw as unclean. In adolescence, he joined the Boy Scouts, learning knots, order, and silence. He grew fascinated by precision, how rope obeyed hands, how a tent could stand perfectly if each line was tight. He remembered the satisfaction of symmetry. Years later, he would say, "I like things that stayed where I put them." He graduated high school, barely passing, enlisted in the Navy, and was sent to Vietnam. The chaos of war only reinforced his need for control. He spent nights painting his boots, folding clothes, counting his belongings. While others gambled or drank, Ridgway walked the perimeter alone. He said later, "I didn't mind the dead ones. They were quiet." And when he returned home, he married quickly, trying to live the normal life expected of him. But beneath the calm exterior, the patterns from childhood had hardened: order, disgust, control. He would watch women on the streets of Seattle, studying their faces with the same distant focus he once used for rope and knots. By the time his first marriage collapsed, the fantasies were fully formed. He didn't know it yet, but the rules his mother taught him about dirt, about shame, about who deserved punishment had become commandments. The river was waiting. In 1982, Gary Ridgeway was 33 years old, working at the Kenworth truck plant in Renton. To his co-workers, he was quiet, punctual, ordinary. He spent lunch breaks alone, wiping grease from his hands with a folded napkin he carried in his pocket. At home in South King County, he lived in a small brown house with neatly trimmed hedges and a truck parked in the driveway. On Sundays, he attended church, holding a Bible worn from repetition. No one saw the rope hidden beneath the seat of his pickup. By the summer of that year, young women had begun disappearing along Pacific Highway South, a stretch of motel lights, diners, and cheap bars. They were hitchhikers, runaways, sex workers, the invisible ones. Ridgway cruised the highway after work, offering rides in his truck, promising cash or a meal. He chose them carefully, alone, tired, easy to trust. The first known victim, Wendy Caulfield, was found in July 1982, floating in the Green River near Kent. She was 16. Within weeks, 3 more girls surfaced downstream, all strangled with ligatures torn from their own clothing. The press gave the killer his name, the Green River Strangler. Ridgway later told investigators that killing was relief, like finishing a job done right. He said he felt clean afterward, as if he had removed something dirty from the world. He often returned to the bodies, sometimes to move them, sometimes just to look. The woods along the river became his workshop, organized, private, silent. Detectives Land and Reichert began to see a pattern. Women vanishing from the same few blocks, found days or weeks later near water or construction sites. Fibers, tire prints, and paint flecks appeared on several victims, but nothing led to a suspect. The FBI profile described a man with a blue-collar job, methodical, sexually frustrated, harboring moral resentment toward his victims. Ridgway fit every line. But so did hundreds of men in King County. By 1983, the task force had 18 victims, hundreds of tips, and no arrests. Ridgway had already learned to hide. He kept trophies, necklaces, shoes, rings, in his house and truck, labeling each with a small mark scratched beneath the seat frame. To the outside world, he was still the soft-spoken mechanic who brought donuts to the office. When questioned once that year, he smiled and said, "I heard about the murders. Terrible stuff." He passed the polygraph easily. The case drifted, and the river went quiet again. For a while. By early 1983, the Green River no longer hid its secret. It carried it downstream every week. The tally of missing women had passed 20. Most were last seen near Highway 99, slipping into the same pickup described again and again: dark paint, quiet driver, kind voice. Gary Ridgeway called them dates. He said it was easier when they trusted him. He always picked spots he knew: the airport road, the wooded trails behind Star Lake, the gravel pits near Enumclaw, places where no one went after dusk. He used the same method: lure, bind, strangle. Then silence, always silence. He preferred to kill at night. "I didn't want to see their faces," he later said. "I wanted to see the ground when it was done." Afterward, he'd cover the bodies with brush, stones, or old carpet. Sometimes he'd scatter dead animals nearby, knowing scavengers would mask the scent. It was methodical, efficient, the logic of a man who believed in cleanliness. Detectives found the first mass dump site in August 1983. 5 women within 100 yards of each other. Their bodies lay arranged almost neatly, as if placed with care, a single shoelace tied around each neck. The press called it the graveyard in the woods. The task force began to fragment under pressure. Leads poured in, but none solidified. Psychics, false confessors, even Ted Bundy from Florida offered insight. Bundy wrote to investigators saying he will revisit the sites. Watch for that. He was right. Ridgway often returned, sometimes days later, to move a body or to relive control. His private life remained spotless. He remarried, attended church, joined Neighborhood Watch. His wife thought his long night drives were for work. He told her he prayed alone by the river. At the plant, co-workers noticed he kept a calendar marked with single letters, PMC. No one asked what they meant. Years later, police learned they stood for Pick Up, Murder, Cleanup. By winter 1984, he had killed more than 30. The task force widened their scope, helicopters, cadaver dogs, and divers searching miles of riverbank. In the cold mud, they found bones, teeth, jewelry, each one another piece of a growing mosaic. Still, Ridgway's calm never cracked. He passed another interview with detectives that spring. When asked about the murders, he said, "Maybe God will catch him." The irony went unnoticed. By 1985, the woods outside Seattle had turned into unmarked cemeteries. Hunters and hikers stumbled upon bones, scraps of clothing, and cords tied into identical knots. The Green River Task Force mapped each site on a wall that began to look less like a chart and more like a constellation, a universe of violence orbiting around one man they could not name. The public's fear hardened into routine. Women on Highway 99 traveled in pairs. Parents forbade night walks. Police checkpoints appeared along the main routes, but Ridgway knew them all. He adjusted, moved north, then east, learning new roads and disposal sites near Tukwila and SeaTac. Each location had the same signature: brush cover, a view of the sky, and water nearby. He called them safe places. At home, life went on. His wife, Claudia, saw nothing but discipline. The yard trimmed, the truck clean, the Bible open on Sunday. He volunteered at church and lectured neighbors on sin. No one imagined the same hands that passed offering plates had tightened ligatures around dozens of throats. Detectives tracked him again in 1987 after a young sex worker escaped his truck and reported being choked from behind. Ridgway was questioned and released. He smiled, spoke softly, and passed another polygraph. DNA technology was still primitive. His trace on the bodies meant nothing yet. That year, he slowed down but never stopped. He buried victims in clusters, 3, 5, sometimes more, so close together that investigators later said it was like he couldn't let them be alone. He returned to the sites for months after the murders, moving bones, whispering apologies no one would hear. By the early 90s, the killings slowed. The river grew quiet, the case cold. Files gathered dust in King County's archives. Detectives retired with unfinished notes. Ridgway divorced again, remarried, aged into invisibility. To the city, he was just another worker who never missed a shift. The woods, however, kept their memory. Each time the rain rose, the earth shifted and another bone surfaced, like the river itself, refusing to forget. When forensics would finally catch up years later, those bones would speak for the dead and for the one who thought he could hide in order. After 1985, the killings slowed, then seemed to stop. For the first time in years, the Green River ran quiet. Detectives retired, the task force disbanded, and boxes of evidence were sealed, labeled, and stored in the basement of the King County Sheriff's Office. Hundreds of bones, hair samples, and photographs slept under dust. Gary Ridgway, meanwhile, continued his life unnoticed. He remarried in 1988 to a woman named Judith. Together they bought a house in Auburn with a fenced yard and a dog. Neighbors described him as polite, reliable, the kind of man who offered to mow lawns when others were away. He worked steadily at Kenworth, attending church each Sunday, sitting in the same pew. The calm was deceptive. Though his active killing waned, he confessed later that he still thought about the girls every day. He revisited his old dump sites, sometimes just to check they were still there. In one interview, he said, "It made me feel like I had something no one could take from me, a secret I built myself." Meanwhile, technology was catching up. By the mid-1990s, advances in DNA analysis began to reopen long, cold cases. The King County Sheriff's Office formed a new forensic unit and reviewed old evidence. Technicians re-examined the ligatures and fingernail scrapings collected in 1982. Samples once considered useless. Microscopic fibers from paint and carpets were matched to industrial sources, narrowing possible suspects. Still, without a name, the Green River case remained unsolved. In 1997, a young detective named Tom Jensen reopened the files. He spent months cataloging each item, more than 50,000 pieces of evidence. He found Ridgway's name again and again in the early reports, marked interviewed, cleared. But something about the details, his truck, his proximity, his polygraph from 1984, felt unfinished. Jensen ordered new DNA testing on the samples. Ridgway, now nearing 50, sensed nothing. He was busy remodeling his home, painting walls beige, attending barbecues with coworkers. He believed he had beaten time, but in a sealed lab in Seattle, beneath a humming fluorescent light, machines began to hum. The blood and saliva stored for decades began to yield what the river never could: a name. In 1998, Detective Tom Jensen's persistence finally met the future. For 2 years, he had resorted every sealed envelope, every fiber, every strand of hair from the Green River files. When new DNA profiling machines arrived in Seattle, he requested that the old samples be tested again. The lab technicians warned him that degradation over time might make them useless. Jensen only nodded. Run them anyway. In December 2000, the first partial profile appeared. A tiny sequence from microscopic residue found on the rope used to strangle Marsha Chapman in 1982. It matched the profile from another victim, Carol Christensen. 2 decades apart, one signature. The lab added it to the National CODIS database. There was no hit yet. In the spring of 2001, Jensen found a memo from 1984 noting that one suspect's saliva had been taken and stored: Gary Ridgway. At the time, DNA testing didn't exist. The sample had sat in a freezer for 17 years. Jensen ordered it tested. The results arrived on September 10, 2001. Across 3 murder cases, the same DNA appeared, identical to Gary Leon Ridgway. Probability of error, 1 in 100 billion. The news broke quietly. No press, no sirens. Jensen and his supervisor met in a dim office, surrounded by old case boxes. After 20 years, Jensen said, we've got him. Surveillance began immediately. Ridgway still worked at Kenworth, still attended church, still drove the same pickup. Agents followed him through the aisles of hardware stores, through parking lots, through the same routes where the bodies had been found. He never noticed. When detectives reviewed his employment records, they found chilling symmetry. Every day he'd missed work matched the date of a murder. Each absence neatly logged, personal day. In November 2001, they secured a warrant to collect fresh DNA from Ridgway. A cheek swab was taken, sent to the state lab, and the match confirmed. The Green River Killer had a name. He still smiled in church the next Sunday, unaware that the river he once used to erase his sins had begun to speak. November 30th, 2001. It was a grey morning in Renton, Washington. Gary Ridgway left work at the Kenworth plant around 3 p.m., heading toward his truck. The detectives had been waiting for weeks, engines running quietly in the parking lot. When he turned the key, they moved in. "Gary Leon Ridgway," one of them said, "you are under arrest for the murders of Marcia Chapman, Opal Mills, and Cynthia Hines." He blinked, confused for only a moment, then nodded. "Okay," he said. "You got me for those three." At the King County Sheriff's Office, he sat calmly in a small interview room, hands folded. The detectives expected denial, panic. But Ridgway was composed. They showed him photos of the victims, crime scene maps, the DNA report. He read each page slowly, as if reviewing a manual at work. When asked if he knew the women, he replied, "I might have picked them up once. I picked up a lot of girls." When they pressed further, his voice lowered. "I didn't mean to kill them all," he said. "Some just made me mad." For 2 days, the interrogation continued. He never raised his voice. He spoke of the killings as tasks, something to be scheduled, done, forgotten. He admitted to using his own house for some murders, describing where he parked, how he used ligatures, how he returned to the scenes later. He said, "I killed so many women. I lost count." Investigators replayed every word. They compared his confessions to evidence, burial sites, positions of bodies, missing jewelry. Every detail matched. When asked why he chose the Green River, he answered simply, "It washed them clean." On December 5th, 2001, prosecutors announced that the man responsible for the longest and largest serial murder case in U.S. history was in custody. Over the next months, Ridgway led police to 48 confirmed sites. He guided them through forests and ravines with chilling precision. "2 steps left of the rock," he would say, "under that tree." Each time, bones emerged where he pointed. In 2003, faced with overwhelming evidence, Ridgway made a deal. He would confess to all the murders he could recall to avoid the death penalty. He spent months in a small room, recounting each life taken, one by one. Every confession was documented, catalogued, archived. The Green River case, after 2 decades, had finally closed, not with triumph but with exhaustion. Detective Jensen, who had spent half his life chasing a ghost, watched him leave the interrogation room for the last time. "He wasn't a monster," he said later. "He was an empty man who needed control." The silence that followed felt heavier than the hunt itself. In 2003, the interrogation room had become Gary Ridgway's new workshop. For months, he sat under pale fluorescent light, a pencil and notepad before him. Each day, detectives from the Green River Task Force entered with photos, maps, lists of names, and he spoke. He did not resist, he organized. He described the riverside curves, the dirt roads where he parked his truck, the smell of wet moss. He remembered every turn, but few faces. "I didn't want to look at them," he said. "It made it harder to do what I had to do." Ridgway's voice was calm, his posture methodical. He sketched burial sites with carpenter-like precision. Detectives spread the drawings on the table, grids of death, and each coordinate led to another set of bones. He seemed proud of his memory. "I used rocks," he explained, "to keep animals away. Sometimes plastic bags, sometimes nothing." He smiled slightly. "I liked that the forest finished it for me." His cooperation was not remorse, it was bargain. The prosecution offered to spare him the death penalty if he told them everything, every name, every place. He agreed. The interviews stretched for weeks, filling hundreds of pages of transcripts. He recounted murders in cold detail, the moment of rage, the sound of breath leaving a body, the quiet after. Investigators realized they were not listening to a killer seeking forgiveness. They were listening to a man cataloging his past like inventory. He referred to the victims as projects. Sometimes, he said, I could kill 2 in one night if traffic was light. As the numbers grew, 20, 30, 40, the task force sat in silence. They understood they were hearing the most prolific serial murder case in US history. Ridgway had become a dark archive of their own failure. When they asked why he chose women on the margins, runaways, sex workers, he answered flatly, no one would miss them as much. That made it easier. He never cried, never apologized, never. Only corrected dates and locations, as if accuracy were atonement. The King County Courthouse was silent on the morning of November 5, 2003. Reporters lined the stairs. Families of the missing sat with folded photos on their laps. When Gary Ridgeway entered in chains, heads did not turn in anger, but in recognition. Everyone already knew his face. He pleaded guilty to 48 counts of aggravated murder. The words fell from his mouth like routine. Yes, Your Honor. Yes, that's correct. No emotion, no pause. Each charge was read aloud, one for every woman. The prosecutor's voice cracked only once, reading the age of the youngest, 15. Ridgway did not look up. Families of victims filled the courtroom. Some cried silently, others spoke to him directly during the victim impact statements. You took my daughter, one mother said, but you don't get to take my soul. He nodded slightly and whispered, I'm sorry, as if repeating a phrase he had been told to say. Detective Tom Jensen, who had hunted him for 2 decades, sat in the back row. He later said, it wasn't justice. It was an ending we could live with. The trial was less about guilt, Ridgway had confessed, and more about record. The court entered each confession into the public record, so no one could ever erase those names again. He told the judge he killed to get rid of the urge. He admitted that he sometimes spoke to the bodies afterward, pretending they were still alive. The prosecutor asked why he stopped killing. He answered, I didn't stop. I just ran out of places to put them. When the sentence was read, 48 consecutive life terms without parole, there was no cheer, no relief, only the rustle of paper and the click of his chains as he was led away. Outside, a cold rain fell over Seattle. Reporters called him the Green River Killer for the final time, and the headline the next day read, Ridgway admits to 49, the river finally still. Detectives would spend years afterward checking his maps, searching for missing victims he could no longer recall. They found 3 more. Gary Ridgway now lives in a cell at Walla Walla State Penitentiary, a man surrounded by steel, fluorescent silence and the ghosts of 48 women. His world is measured in hours of light and concrete echoes. Every day he wipes the sink, folds his blanket twice, and eats in silence. Routine is all that remains of the control he once worshipped. Inmates call him Old River. Most keep their distance. Even murderers avoid him, not out of fear, but because he reminds them that some boundaries, even in hell, should not be crossed. He rarely speaks. When he does, it is about maintenance schedules and cleaning supplies. The prison chaplain says Ridgway prays before bed, not for forgiveness, for order. He arranges his Bible at a perfect right angle on the metal shelf, the same precision he once used to place stones over graves. Over the years, journalists and criminologists requested interviews. He declined most. In 2011, one psychologist described him as a man who feels nothing but the need to appear functional. When asked if he remembered their names, he answered, I remember where I left them. Names were for people who mattered. Outside the prison, Washington still searches the woods along the Green River. Each time bones surface, someone asks if it's one of his. He sometimes sends letters to detectives, short, mechanical, as if revising old blueprints. Area west of Highway 18. Possible site. Can't be sure. None have yet led to a new discovery, but each time the old files are reopened, the air thickens and his shadow returns. He turned 74 in 2023. No family visits. His son changed his name years ago. The guards say he still hums while working, low and tuneless, like the sound of water moving under ice. For the families of the lost, his life sentence did not end the nightmare. They still come to the river sometimes, leaving flowers by the current. On quiet days, when the wind shifts, it carries the same damp scent that began it all. Moss, mud, and the faint trace of something human that refuses to fade. By 2024, the Green River flows quietly, carrying no trace of what it once hid. The gravel banks where detectives once dug are overgrown with reeds, and the sound of traffic on Highway 99 drowns out memory. But every few months, someone leaves a cross or a small plastic flower near the bridge, the ritual of a city that learned to live beside its own graveyard. Gary Ridgway's name rarely appears in headlines now. To new generations, he is a shadow from another era, a case study in criminal psychology, not a man. But for those who hunted him, detectives, reporters, families, the silence he left behind feels heavier than his crimes. It is the silence of unanswered questions. How could someone so ordinary bury so much horror in plain sight? Retired Detective Dave Reichert still keeps a copy of the 1982 river map on his wall. He says he leaves it there as proof that monsters look like neighbors. Every red circle marks a body once pulled from mud. The ink has faded to brown. He says it reminds him of the faces he never found. Ridgway remains confined to Walla Walla. When questioned in 2021, he said he no longer remembers all the names. Experts doubt that his memory, once methodical, has not failed. He simply has nothing left to gain from remembering. He will die there under state supervision, his grave unmarked by request of the victims' families. Yet the legacy of the Green River Killer endures in the laboratories his crimes changed. The birth of modern forensic DNA analysis, the persistence of behavioral profiling, the creation of databases that now prevent others from hiding so long. In the end, Ridgway did not become a legend. He became a warning. To every detective and every mother who waits by a phone, his name means one thing, that evil is not chaos, but order twisted beyond recognition. The Green River is calm again. But beneath the surface, where silt and time conceal what remains, the echo of his crimes still moves with the current, quiet, patient, and endless.